have Ken Ruffin. He will be our keynote speaker and he'll be walking us through a great presentation. We just want to highlight Ken a little about his background. Ken is the president of National Space Society from North Texas. He is a senior environmental engineer with a 30-year of air quality engineering experience. In 2010, Ken became active member of NSS, which is the National Space Society of North Texas, serving the Dallas-Fort Worth area. In 2011, Ken began creating his presentation on space travel and space development. He also began serving as either the president or vice president of NSS North Texas that same year. From 2013 to 2023, NSS North of Texas has earned the NSS Chapter of the Year award 5 times and has earned second place in the world 6 times. Additionally, Ken has earned an NSS Chapters Leader Award from NSS Chapters Committee in 2018 and 2023. Now, I would like to welcome Ken to give his presentation. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for the introduction. I had grabbed a cordless mic hoping that I'd be able to walk around the stage, but I was told I have to be on camera here in front of the laptop, so I won't be able to get my steps in. Oh well. All right. So, will I be advancing the slides from here, or will someone do it in the back? I'll try it from here and see what happens. So, right. So, the title of my presentation, the title's been massaged a little bit. I have to admit, I like it better than my original title. It's The State of Space Today and Tomorrow with NASA and Commercial Spaceflight. All right. Yeah, this works. So I've got a brief introduction, excuse me. Then in part 1, I'll discuss future NASA robotic missions. And I have to say, being here in Houston, there's a very, very high likelihood that there are NASA employees, at least one that I've already met here in the audience, one, maybe more. So I got to make sure that I dot my I's, cross my T's. And if not, let me know, because I want everything to be accurate. All right, so part 2, oops. Okay, that wasn't me. I didn't have to say, did I do that? Future NASA crewed spaceflight. And, that's based out of Johnson Space Center in Clear Lake, right outside of Houston. So really got to get that right. Part 3, future commercial spaceflight, and then some brief conclusions. All right. For my intro, I'm starting with the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter. It was launched in 2009, so it's been orbiting the moon in a polar orbit for 14 years now. And why am I talking about a not very recent mission? Well, it's still ongoing, and it has, for the last 14 years, not only photographed the entire surface of the moon over and over and over, which, on the surface may not seem to be a great thing, but since there are asteroid/meteor impacts with the moon from time to time, we have before and after pictures in many cases of wherever there's an asteroid impact during the last 14 years at least. We've seen before and after photos, and we're able to get even more data about the moon from those photos, as well as there's an altimeter. This probe takes temperature measurements and much more. So a very underappreciated probe, I would say, very underappreciated orbiter. This is a NASA graphic of the Artemis program, and it's showing from left to right chronologically, for the most part, robotic and uncrewed and crewed Artemis missions. And I'll talk more about pretty much all of them as the presentation goes on. All right. I wanted to congratulate the very recent landing of the probe from India. This is a combination lander and rover, which on August 25th, just a few weeks ago, landed near the South Pole of the moon. It's the first robotic mission, first mission period, and it's robotic to land and in the South Polar region. So lander and rover, and congrats to the Indian Space Resource Organization, ISRO. All right, part one, future NASA robotic spaceflight. So this is my favorite acronym of all the NASA acronyms. This is VIPER. This is Volatiles Investigating Polar Exploration Rover. I had asked one of the NASA scientists working with this mission if it would be possible to put like a sticker on the probe with like the head of a snake, viper with the fangs. No, he just shut me off before I could finish explaining. But it's scheduled to launch NET no earlier than November of 2004, going to the lunar South Polar region again, and that's going to be a common theme. And the reason for that is, and this audience may already be aware, the presence of water has been detected in craters at the South Pole, North Pole and South Pole, actually, of the moon. And the expectation is that there are millions of tons of ice at about minus 400 degrees Fahrenheit within these craters. So that's a potential source of not just water for whether it's astronauts or future settlers, perhaps on the moon. But not just water again, and water for drinking, for bathing, for growing crops, if you've got people living there, but also potentially a source of oxygen. Water is H2O or dihydrogen oxide. I think I heard a professor tell me decades ago. Um, and so source of oxygen, and with separating water into those elements and chilling them, you've got liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen that can be used as rocket fuels, whether it's to get back to the Earth potentially or further away from the Earth, Mars being the next destination, at least for human spaceflight or crewed spaceflight. All right. Beyond that, and these are just highlights, there are many other robotic missions on the schedule, on NASA schedule, including one in 3 weeks that's launching to the asteroid belt, the Psyche mission, and I'm scheduled to be there to watch that. So fingers crossed that it launches October 5th. But here, the Mars sample return. This is NASA and the European Space Agency's joint mission where they are planning using several different vehicles, starting with the Perseverance rover, which has been on Mars for a few years, for 3 years now, the Mars 2020 rover originally. Perseverance collecting samples, sealing them within containers for an eventual lander with a helicopter lander first, helicopter attached, then the helicopter would pick up these samples, return or bring the samples to the lander's Mars ascent vehicle, the small rocket that would leave from Mars surface, rendezvous with an Mars orbiter or a probe orbiting Mars that would return the samples to Earth. So several step process. Hardware is already under development, I believe, at JPL. And NET no earlier than 2027 for the launch, 2033 for the sample return. Right. Part two. One of my favorite photos of the International Space Station. This has been Humanity's Home in Space. I mean, here I'm in Houston, so kind of preaching to the choir here. Humanity's Home in Space since November 2nd, 2000. So we're approaching 23 years where somebody, or at least one somebody, has been living and working in space. Different crews going back and forth, actually 70 crews. So this particular photo is different than almost every other photo I've seen because most photos are taken where essentially the probe or the camera is farther um, from the Earth than ISS. You've got the Earth, you've got ISS, then you've got the camera. Well, in this particular photo, the camera's between the Earth and ISS. So it's showing the ISS from a different angle. I don't want to say underneath because, there's no up, down in space, but from I guess, from the Earth facing angle. So you can see the modules that make up um, the interior capacity, of a 6-bedroom house. That's where the astronauts and some space tourists and some other scientists live and work. So ISS, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, this is going back a couple of years for a reason, and this is an example. This is the first crewed mission launching. So you had American astronauts launching from American vehicles from American soil at this point in 2020 for the first time in 9 years. From the shuttle's retirement in the summer of 2011 until what ended up being May of 2020, the only way that anyone from any country could get to low Earth orbit was by the Russian Soyuz rocket and Russian Soyuz capsule until SpaceX, owned by Elon Musk, launched this is Demo 2, Demonstration Mission 2, so a test mission with astronauts for the first time on a Falcon 9 rocket. So here's a photo so you can see the capsule to scale with people in the clean room. All right. So here's the actual launch photo with that capsule at the very top, Falcon 9 rocket. Again, it was late May. So I've been passionate about space since I was 8 years old. So no, that wasn't last year. Um, so it's the last millennia. Falcon 9, first time astronauts launched from America in 9 years. I was excited about it. I reached out to some local news stations and asked if I could be on camera talking about it. So 2020, this was during the worldwide shutdown. So I was at home at the time. This was a Dallas ABC, local ABC news station, Channel 8. I got interviewed by one of their news anchors to talk about that mission that I was excited about then and apparently still am now. So this was on May 27th, leading up to a couple of days before the mission, few days before the mission, and May 27th, right? Another anchor the next day, same station, interviewed me again to talk even more. He had a completely different set of questions about that Demo 2 mission. So that's my way through National Space Society of just trying to inform the general public about the latest information in space travel and plans for the future, whether it's NASA, whether it's commercial space flight. People should know. I'm here to help. All right. So Expedition 70, meaning this is the 70th set of astronauts and cosmonauts to travel to the International Space Station. So since November 2nd, 2000. So these 4 individuals docked a couple of weeks ago and near the end of August. And this is a NASA graphic showing the various cargo and crewed modules docked with ISS. And this is dated as of September 15th, which was yesterday. So I'm sorry for the outdated information, but it's the best I could do. Coming up next, this is the SpaceX Crew 8. One cosmonaut and 3 astronauts, similar to Crew 7. And they will be participating in Expedition 70, which is ongoing now, and Expedition 71, they're scheduled to launch early 2014. On the right is Dr. Jeanette Epps. She's been in the active astronaut corps for several years, but has not traveled to space yet. So if all goes well, finally, early 2024, she will travel to space. I had the privilege of meeting her. I call this photo picture of a selfie. So I'm taking a selfie with Dr. Epps. One of my National Space Society chapter members comes along with the camera, takes a picture of me taking the selfie, and it wasn't a bad day. In addition to SpaceX, which has a contract, I should have said earlier, it has a contract with NASA, not just to deliver crew, but also prior to that, a contract to deliver cargo to the International Space Station, to ISS. Boeing also has a contract using their Crew Space Transportation 100 Starliner capsule. The plan, the intent is for this capsule to also bring astronauts to and from the International Space Station. This is an actual photo of the capsule on top of an Atlas V rocket, United Launch Alliance's Atlas V rocket, May of 2022, in preparation for a test launch, for one of their test launches. So here's the capsule, CST-100 up close. There's some people just to give you an idea of the scale. And there was an uncrewed successful test launch in December of 2019. There was a successful uncrewed launch from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station from May 19th through 24th, 2022. And the next mission, which is scheduled to carry Barry Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams, NASA astronauts, it was scheduled to launch this year. It's been postponed and postponed. And on August 7th, Boeing announced that the launch has been postponed to no earlier than March of 2024. There have been technical difficulties. So those will be resolved. Okay, so NASA itself. We've got Artemis 1. I mentioned the Artemis program. Artemis is NASA's return to the moon and then traveling to Mars. So Artemis 1, this is the Space Launch System rocket and Orion capsule. This was sitting on the launch pad 39B at NASA Kennedy Space Center, photo from June of 2022. And I chose this particular photo because you've got the rocket and its destination at the top left, or near the top left, you've got the moon. So this is an uncrewed mission on doing what I call a test drive, where the rocket sent the Orion capsule on a test drive around the moon and back. Actually, around and around and around the moon and back. So uncrewed launch. Back in December of 2020, NASA had announced that 18 of the active astronauts would be Artemis astronauts, eligible to travel to the moon and back, and then to Mars and back. However, on August 5th of last year, 2022, all 42 active astronauts are officially Artemis astronauts. They're all eligible to travel moon and back, Mars and back. They're all going through training for those missions. And I would imagine they're happier that each and every one of them will have an opportunity to make one trip to one destination or the other. So here's a photo from April 3rd of 2023. There was a big announcement on that day at the Clear Lake facility, and I'll talk more about that shortly. Artemis 1. So here's the NASA infographic showing, again, the launch from Kennedy Space Center, Launch Complex 39B, where the rocket sent the capsule around and around and around the moon, and the capsule returned to the Earth. So that's the plan. That's the flight plan. I was there. Pixar didn't happen. August 28th of last year. One of the scheduled launch dates was August 29th. So this was the day before. I still thought, as you can tell by the grin on my face, I thought the rocket was going to be launching. It was still on schedule to launch. That's the rocket over my shoulder. So that was August 28th. It did not launch August 29th. By September 27th, it still hadn't launched, and it was scheduled to launch, but Hurricane Ian had other plans. So it passed basically by Kennedy Space Center. Rockets and hurricanes don't mix, so the rocket didn't launch. Then November 16th, rocket launch. December 11th, Orion capsule return. It was a night launch at about 1:35-ish a.m. Central. I definitely stayed awake to watch it on my phone. I wasn't there at the time. I didn't have, 2 months vacation time, so couldn't do it. One of my favorite photos from that mission, here's the Orion capsule as Orion, as I mentioned, passed or orbited around the moon several times. Here's a photo taken from a camera at the end of one of the solar panels, looking back not just at the moon when it was about 30,000 miles further from the Earth, than when the capsule was 30,000 miles further from the Earth than the moon is, but with the moon and the Earth in the background, top right-hand corner. So no human being has yet to travel this far from the Earth or the moon, not yet. Artemis 2. So here's a mission, the next mission, which will be a crewed mission, where the Space Launch System rocket will send the Orion capsule around the moon once, and then Orion capsule back to the Earth. So that is scheduled no earlier than late 2024. And on that April 3rd date, where you saw the picture of all 42 active astronauts, these four were announced as the Artemis astronauts. So there's a Canadian astronaut, CSA, Canadian Space Agency, the NASA astronaut Victor Glover, Reed Weissman, and Christina Koch, I believe is how her name's pronounced. And it was several years ago, there was an announcement that there was going to be the first woman and the first, I won't say person of color, I'll say man of color, because I don't want to be redundant. First woman, first man of color traveling to the moon. They will not land on the moon, but they will, again, loop around the moon essentially once without orbiting the moon. So traveling around the moon back to the Earth. So that's Artemis 2, no earlier than late 2024. Artist concept of what will be the Gateway space station, which will orbit the moon. And it will be in a near rectilinear halo orbit. I actually have a sketch of that coming up. And the first two modules, so less than what you see here, are scheduled to launch no earlier than November of next year. So fingers crossed there. Artemis 3, the plan that NASA has is for not just astronauts to land near the south pole of the moon with Artemis 3, but the first woman and first man of color. Artemis 3, on the infographic, it says 2024. Since then, it's been postponed to 2025, late 2025, possibly early 2026. These are the 13 candidate or potential landing sites that NASA is in the process of selecting from. to determine, locations near the South Pole. So one of these 13 sites will be chosen as the official landing site. So as far as the vehicle for that landing, NASA had a competition in 2021. Well, it ended 2021 at least, for the human landing system. NASA asked commercial spaceflight companies to provide their proposals for a lunar lander, which again is called the human landing system. Well, SpaceX was already developing their Starship. Um, Even though NASA, their criteria was to have two astronauts be able to land on the moon, to travel from the moon's orbit to the moon's surface, back to the moon's orbit. This has the capability of carrying 100 people at a time. Hasn't been done yet, but that's the intent. So what you what you can see about halfway up the Starship vehicle, that's actually a crewed rover. That's not like a Mars robotic rover or even lunar robotic rover. There's one coming, but that's a rover that astronauts will be able to travel in. So that's actually coming down on an elevator, well, down or up, either to or from the lunar surface. So, and there are astronauts near the bottom of the rocket to scale. It's about 170 feet tall, or about the height of a 17-story building. So, NASA artwork of the first woman, first man of color on the moon with that Artemis 3 mission, no earlier than late 2025. There is a lander in the background. This was sort of a placeholder land. This image was developed before the SpaceX Starship was chosen as the lander. So I have in parentheses, lander may vary. This is the announcement back on March 15th of 2023. Axiom Space was chosen to develop the spacesuits that astronauts will wear for an Artemis 3 mission. So this is the new lunar spacesuit. And someone was demonstrating it during this NASA announcement. There was someone in a spacesuit on stage, and they were demonstrating their mobility within the suit, how they could twist, how they could squat, how they could move in pretty much any direction. A significant improvement in freedom of movement. NASA graphic for Artemis 4. And this is currently scheduled to be the first mission for the Orion capsule to dock with that Gateway space station, which will be orbiting the moon in a near rectilinear halo orbit. And this is one of the two graphics where you can see that orbit. It's going to orbit the poles, but it's going to approach the North Pole much, much closer than the South Pole. So that's going to be the Gateway orbit. So here's a cutaway view of the different segments of the Gateway. This will not every module will not be developed by NASA. As you can see, some will be developed by other countries, some will be developed by commercial spaceflight companies. So the intent is for the SpaceX Falcon Heavy rocket to launch actually the first two modules. The power and propulsion element and the habitation and logistics orbiter, I believe. I'm incorrect, my apologies. So SpaceX launching some modules, the Space Launch System launching others, and again, various components, various modules from a number of different sources. Artemis 5, this is a NASA graphic showing where the Esprit refueling module will be added to the Gateway. So vehicles for the first time, according to this plan, will be able to refuel in lunar orbit while orbiting the moon. And This will, instead of the astronauts going to the lunar surface and back in a SpaceX Starship, they'll be traveling in a Blue Origin, Blue Moon lunar lander. And this is scheduled for no earlier than 2029. So really busy slide, kind of hard to read. There's no pop quiz, so you don't have to memorize this. But these are the different components of the complete Gateway space station. And I mentioned that near rectilinear halo orbit, again, passing really close, relatively close to the North Pole, relatively far from the South Pole. And this graphic shows various different lunar orbits. So I mentioned the Blue Origin Blue Moon lander as the lander for astronauts for Artemis 5. So this was announced May 19th of this year, and this is the artwork of that Blue Moon lander. So, Artemis program, back to the moon, then to Mars. Note that this is not to scale. All right, let's make that clear. We do not want to see Mars and the moon this close together. It would be a very, very bad, very final day. All right. As far as an option to get to Mars, here is a demonstration. So it's a test for rocket to Agile Cislunar Operations, or DRACO. This is a joint NASA and DARPA from the Department of Defense to test a nuclear thermal rocket no earlier than 2027. When I was an 8-year-old kid in 1974, I first read about nuclear thermal technology. That's when I became a space enthusiast. That was NERVA that I was reading about. This was a canceled program, even in 1974, nuclear engine for rocket vehicle applications. So I have literally been waiting since 1974 for an announcement of an upgrade, essentially, of NERVA. And this is an artist concept, but this will involve having a liquid hydrogen fuel tank. Liquid hydrogen, so you're talking approximately 450 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. That liquid passing through piping that would liquid traveling through piping that and the piping would would have heat transferred from a nuclear reactor, a small nuclear reactor, which would be activated once the vehicle is in low Earth orbit. So you've got minus 450 degree liquid hydrogen, you've got about a 10,000 degree Fahrenheit nuclear reactor. That's going to transfer a significant amount of thermal energy from the reactor to the liquid hydrogen. So your exhaust velocity, the speed of the exhaust coming out of the rocket engine nozzle, is expected to be about twice the velocity of a chemical rocket engine. Chemical rockets being the rockets that we're accustomed to that we see launching from the Earth. So this would not launch from the Earth. This would only be operated in space, again, starting in low Earth orbit. So with twice the exhaust velocity, over time, the vehicle could travel twice as fast. So maybe not so much for getting from the Earth to the moon to some extent, but even more so from the Earth to Mars. So instead of that average 8-month travel time from the Earth to Mars using chemical rocket technology, with nuclear thermal technology, fingers crossed, 4 months one way. So that's a lot less radiation exposure from solar, from galactic cosmic radiation, from coronal mass ejections possibilities, as well as lowering the requirements for oxygen, for water, for food, for everything people would need to survive the trip to Mars and back. So I'm a little excited about it. NASA artwork of astronauts on Mars. You can see on the left side of the screen, that crewed rover design once again. It's been tested for years, going back to the Constellation program. So future astronauts on Mars. The timeline that I've heard is late 2030s, um, December 2039-ish. So we'll see. So that's part two. So lots of information. Some of you, for some, this may be a review. For some of you, this might be brand new. But hopefully you got something out of it so far. But wait, there's more. Part three, future commercial spaceflight. We're not done. This is Virgin Galactic, actual photo of suborbital spaceflight, mind you. This is their White Knight suborbital space plane, which carries their Spaceship Two space plane. I'm sorry, White Knight airplane mothership, carrying the Spaceship Two suborbital space plane up to 40,000, 50,000 feet altitude, releasing Spaceship Two. Then its engine fires, brings the vehicle up to a few thousand miles per hour and just over 50 miles altitude. So this is for space tourism as well as short-term microgravity experiments. Short-term being 5 to 10-minute microgravity experiments. And for the space tourists, they experience microgravity, not weightlessness, microgravity for that same 5 to 10 minutes. Recently, August 10th, these were the passengers on that Spaceship Two vehicle. So John Goodwin's a former Olympic athlete, and there's a mother-daughter team, the first ever mother-daughter team to travel to space, suborbital space, but space nonetheless. So that was just over a month ago. All right. Another company that's already developed a suborbital space vehicle. Oh, and let me backtrack for a moment. With Virgin Galactic, their intent is to continue, not only to continue launching their suborbital space missions, but over time to launch them much more frequently. So that's the intent, to get as many people, paying passengers, into space as possible. And based on supply and demand, whether it's this company or any other, the expectation is as more people travel, as long as the vehicle proves itself to be safe, then the price per person, or the ticket price, is expected to drop considerably. So far, it's still going in the opposite direction. But if all goes well, it's eventually expected to drop. So same applies to Blue Origin, developed by the New Shepard, developed by Blue Origin. So the New Shepard suborbital rocket and capsule, those launches began on the 52nd anniversary of the first moon landing. So, and this was a launch that featured the owner of Blue Origin. That's the gentleman second from the left with the cowboy hat. That's Jeff Bezos. So for the very first suborbital mission carrying people, he wanted to demonstrate that, yes, this is safe. Yes, he's so confident that it's safe that he traveled on it himself. The gentleman on the right is his brother. So they traveled, of course, on this mission together. The young gentleman on the far left is the son of a billionaire who was originally expected to travel on this mission, but he had a schedule conflict. He couldn't go. The son went in his place. And third from the left, last but not least, is Wally Funk, the legendary Wally Funk. Talk more about her in a moment. But first, it's going to be really hard for me to get responses from this question, but I have to ask. Who thinks that I am talking to who at the time was the richest person in the world? Who thinks I'm talking to Jeff Bezos? I'm just going to ask the in-person audience here at University of Houston. And absolutely no. Oh, we've got one hand. One hand. Two, three, four. Okay. For those of you who did not raise your hands, O ye of little faith, through the National Space Society, anyone can have the opportunity to meet living legends, whether it's the richest person in the world who was a keynote speaker at our International Space Development Conference. This was in Los Angeles a few years ago. This gentleman, other uh, company founders, CEOs, astronauts. I mean, Houston, you guys meet astronauts like, that's like pumping gas for, everybody else. But for the rest of us who do not live in the city where astronauts live, it's an absolute privilege to be able to meet them, talk to them. But yeah, Jeff Bezos. This was actually a VIP reception for him. So I was invited. I didn't sneak in. I was actually invited to the reception. And I told him, we were discussing that it was stated in my introduction that I started giving space presentations in 2011. In my very first presentation, I had a one-page slide for Blue Origin where I had the name Blue Origin at the top and the screen was blank below that because there was no images, no information that was publicly available about Blue Origin in 2011. But I was confident that at some point that there would be. So I was telling Mr. Bezos that I wanted the audience to know that your company existed, even though I had absolutely nothing to show them. And he chuckled a little and he thanked me for um, my enthusiasm, for my confidence in his ability to, be able to eventually have a rocket to show people and to launch successfully and, launching, including him. So I mentioned Wally Funk. Quick history lesson. In the year 1960, NASA had an announcement. They had created a new job opening for a position called astronaut. Brand new position, never existed before 1960. So thousands of men applied to become astronauts. Thousands of women applied to become astronauts. Out of the thousands of men who went through an enormous number of rigorous tests, physical tests, classroom tests, you name it, 7 men out of the thousands who applied passed all of the tests, including 1,000 hours or more as fighter pilot hours. 7 men, they ended up becoming the legendary Mercury 7 astronauts, the first 7 astronauts who existed. Out of the thousands of women who applied, 13 women passed all of the requirements except the 1,000 hours as fighter pilots, 1,000 hours or more, because in 1960, women and men of color were not allowed to be fighter pilots. So out of those 13 women, Wally Funk, pictured here in the sweater, who traveled with Jeff Bezos on the suborbital flight on the New Shepard, not only were her scores for everything, the physical and classroom tests, better than the other 13 women, her scores were better than those 7 men, the legendary Mercury 7, but she still was not allowed to go to space until 2021, 2 years ago. Wally Funk lives in a suburb of Dallas, Grapevine, Texas. Jeff Bezos shows up at her front door with a camera crew and introduces himself. Hi, I'm Jeff Bezos. I own a company called Blue Origin. I have a rocket, a suborbital rocket called the New Shepard. I'm going to be traveling to suborbital space. I would like for you to travel with me. I'm going to go back. Needless to say, her answer was yes. So that was that I thought that was just a fantastic moment of kindness. All right. So National Space Society members had an opportunity to hang out with her. This was at her church in December of 2021. There was a celebration, one of countless celebrations for her, who had waited from age 20 in 1960 when she passed all of those tests to age 81 when she actually went into space. She waited 61 years to get into space. So she was celebrated anywhere and everywhere she could be celebrated. All right. Inspiration 4. There's another billionaire named Jared Isaacman who is not building rockets or capsules, but he has funded directly or indirectly one mission. This mission, he provided a dollar for dollar match to the St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital for for anyone from the public who donated money. Again, he matched dollar for dollar. So it ended up being between 200 million and 250 million total that went to the hospital. And there were contests. There were 3 different contests, and the winners of each of those contests were expected to travel into orbit with him on a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket and Crew Dragon capsule. And in this particular mission, the Inspiration 4 mission, this capsule did not go to the International Space Station. It actually orbited the Earth about 100 miles higher than the International Space Station and did so for 3 days. So these 4 individuals have now traveled farther from the surface of the Earth than any other humans since 1972, the last Apollo mission, Apollo 17, that went to the moon and back. So, photo from inside the Crew Dragon capsule and the names of the 4 individuals. The 2 individuals on the right, Chris Sembrowski and Dr. Cy Proctor. Sorry, Dr. Cy, I forgot to put doctor there. I met them at one of the National Space Society's conferences in LA a few years ago. I think it's the same one that Jeff Bezos was a keynote speaker at. So they were just, people attending the conference like me. And I just happened to, have a little small talk with them from time to time, like you do at a conference. You guys should have small talk also, by the way. I had no idea, and they had no idea in 2018 that they were going to end up going to space into 2021. So you never know who you're going to meet in the space industry and what they'll end up doing. I had the privilege of being interviewed to discuss that particular mission by, this is another local news station in Dallas. This is Channel 5 NBC News, where earlier that day, the date of the launch, September 15th, 2021, I got a phone call from Channel 5 reporter, Allie Spilliards, and she asked me if I was going to be watching the launch. I said, of course. And she said, well, are you having like a watch party for the launch? I said, well, it's like on a weekday. It's like during rush hours, like between 4 and 5 p.m. It's kind of odd timing, to have a party. It wasn't like Saturday afternoon or evening. That would have been awesome. So I said, no, I'm not having a party. It's going to be just me at home. And she said, well, can I come with a photojournalist and can we interview you while you watch the launch? So I thought about it. No, I didn't. No. Yes, of course. Please come over. So I was interviewed in my home watching the Inspiration 4 launch, all thanks to the National Space Society and the exposure I've gotten from them. So, speaking of the National Space Society, this is about half of the award-winning, somebody knew that was coming, the award-winning local chapter. We were on stage. 2 of the members actually, you've got 3 chapter members here. 2 of them are in this picture, I believe. I know, yeah, yep, I see you guys on the left. That's Kelly and Lucia Bishop. And Again, about half of the chapter members, this is less than half, but a total of about half attended the conference. The 41st Annual International Space Development Conference was in the Dallas area. It's usually either in Los Angeles or Washington, D.C., but this year in 2023, it was in the Dallas area. So we didn't need to fly. It was optional whether or not you got a hotel room. And kneeling in the front. Before I get to kneeling in the front, in the center at the back, that's Jared Isaacman. That's the billionaire that funded the Inspiration 4 mission and who will eventually be involved in a Polaris mission. That's his next, Polaris Dawn. That's his next mission to space. I believe it's coming up later this year. So that's him. And this is actually during the chapter award ceremony. Every year during this annual conference, the National Space Society's chapter committee issues, or I should say grants, provides awards to the chapters which do the best job of public outreach. And it was mentioned during the introduction, the North Texas chapter is coming sixth place in the world, so second place in the world 6 times, number 1 in the world 5 times. So this little certificate here that I'm holding, I've got the black shirt and my space tie on. Forgot to wear a space tie today. Shame on me. So I'm holding the second place award, and I've got witnesses here. While I was sitting at the table, kind of grumbling internally that we came in second place and not first place, there was a question and answer session going around, and I asked the person with the microphone if he could allow me to ask the last question. And he said, yeah. So my last question to Jared Isaacman was, since we came in second place, basically, could my chapter members come up to the stage and take a photo with you? You know, that was my way of calming down and saying, well, yeah, at least we did this. So here's the photo. And this guy kneeling in the front is the CEO of the National Space Society. He's not a chapter member, but he's the CEO, so we didn't stop him. So that was fun. I mentioned Polaris Dawn. That's the next mission. When I was on stage talking to Jared Isaacman, and I mentioned, hey, I talk about him and Inspiration 4 my presentations, and Polaris Dawn is coming, so I'll let audiences know. Here's something to look out for. He gave me, this is one coin, it's each side of the coin. So something I will treasure forever. Space stations. Been talking about ISS. For ISS, there was Skylab. That was 73 to 79. But here's what's coming potentially, most likely, I would say, after ISS. 4 different options, each one built by a different company. And each one is planning to, because these are companies, not NASA, not a government agency or agencies, they're planning to develop profitable items in microgravity, in low Earth orbit. So this is a competition, essentially, that's just getting warmed up. And some of these companies have NASA support, some do not, but they're all moving forward. SpaceX. I mentioned the SpaceX Starship already as the vehicle for the human landing system. The upper stage, the black portion, that's actually the underside. That the black is because of the ceiling tiles. The top of the vehicle, if it were horizontal, is stainless steel, like the first stage, the super heavy portion. So this vehicle, again, is intended to be able to carry 100 people at a time into space and back. So this is a photo from early, I think it was February of 2023, of that photo of that rocket on the launch pad. And this is at Starbase, which is on Boca Chica Island, Texas. It's basically at the southernmost point of Texas in the Gulf of Mexico. So any launches, for example, of this vehicle in particular, the launches are intended to go over the Gulf of Mexico. So at least in the early stages of the launch, if there were something unfortunate to happen, as Elon Musk calls them, a rapid unscheduled disassembly, RUD. If that were to happen, the pieces would fall in the Gulf of Mexico and not Florida. So, actual photo from April 20th, 2023. Elon Musk being a little creative there, chose April 20th. And this was a test launch that was intended for the Super Heavy first stage at the bottom to send the Starship at the top, which has its own fuel and engines, on almost a complete trip around the Earth, launching from Boca Chica Island, Texas, and splashing down about 100 miles off the coast of Hawaii, traveling eastward. So almost one lap around the Earth. But it did not succeed in that mission. It was not a complete success. It launched, but there were several technical difficulties. The FAA, Federal Aviation Administration's Office of Space Transportation has completed their investigation, and they identified 63 corrective actions for SpaceX to take, some, if not most of which, SpaceX may have already taken. And out of those 63, 6 of those corrective actions would not apply to the next test launch of this rocket. It would apply to future tests beyond that. So, date to be announced. Once the FAA, Office of Space Transportation's confident, we hope, that all of their 57 corrective actions have been met that apply to the next launch, then it's scheduled to launch, I would imagine, at the earliest opportunity after that. And these are photos from a static fire. This is the first stage only on the ground, where all 33 engines were expected to fire, but 31 of the 33 engines fired. This is using methane and liquid oxygen. And the test fire was only for 5 to 6 seconds. Again, a test. The expectation was all 33 engines would operate. They didn't, so there are still adjustments that need to be made, but still progress being made. An image of the future. SpaceX was started in the first place, founded by Elon Musk in the first place, not to put people in low Earth orbit, not to put people on the moon, but to have a human settlement on Mars. That is the entire reason why he started this company in around the year 2000. So this is artwork of multiple SpaceX Starship rockets on the surface of Mars, with a dome in the background that may or may not be practical. That's a conversation for another day. But nonetheless, this is one of countless visions of humanity's presence on Mars in the future, not going for short-term visits, but going to stay. In conclusion, a quote from the legendary Marilyn Monroe. And I did not realize this was her quote for decades. The sky is not the limit. And this is especially to all the students, all of us, but especially the students. The sky is not the limit. Your mind is. Do not allow your creativity to be stifled. Do not allow your passion to be diminished. If you got big dreams, go for them. If you don't have big dreams, go get some. There's nothing more important in life uh, than being able to accomplish all that you can accomplish. And typically, I show this to audiences in North Texas. This is kind of a recruiting page because I talk about awards. not that I remember, but 2014, 2016, 2019, 2021, 2022, number one in the world, the North Texas chapter, the Dallas-Fort Worth chapter. So we have monthly meetings. If anyone's interested, or if you know of anyone that in the Dallas-Fort Worth area who's interested, monthly meetings, second Sunday, starting at 3:30, presentations on the latest information in space travel each month. And finally, same information at the top, but through National Space Society, I've met this gentleman. He did something we haven't done. He walked on the moon. Dr. Buzz Aldrin. I've met him 8 times, all thanks to the National Space Society. And in this particular moment, this is the last time I saw him so far, because I hope to see him again. I said, Dr. Aldrin, I know you've met millions of people, literally from all over the world. I know you don't remember me. And he cut me off and he said, and I quote, "You're from Texas." My honest, yes, I am. Right. Thank you very much. Any questions? I think this is the Q&A portion. Any questions in the room, in person? Yes.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
What is your favorite flight test we did?
My favorite
Like flight test, like of all.
launch?
Yeah.
Wow. Nobody's ever asked me that before. What is my favorite launch? For most of my life, I would say it was watching, even though I didn't see it. Well, no, I didn't see it live. Watching a slow motion video of the Apollo 11 launch from July 16th, 1969. I didn't see it at that time. Not that I wasn't born yet, but I was 3 and I wasn't interested. I truly wasn't. Shame on me. But if I just think of like going to whether it's the NASA or any of the NASA sites, whether it's NASA YouTube or what have you, what video have I just seen over and over and over when nobody was watching? Yeah, it's the Apollo 11 launch in slow motion. It's that parts of that video are shown in different documentaries and have been through the years. But when I actually came across the full, maybe 1 minute video, again, it was probably 10 seconds of launch time, but it was stretched out over a minute. I can't get enough. I just turn into an 8-year-old all over again every time I see it. The power, until, shame on me for not saying this, until the NASA Space Launch System launched last November 15th, that Saturn V rocket was the world's most powerful, successful rocket. And that was from 1967, the very first launch that was the Apollo 4 mission, launching a Saturn V. From 1967 until last year, until 2022, that was the world's most powerful rocket. And Apollo 11, that particular launch, was for the first astronauts to not just go to the moon, but Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin landing and walking on the moon. So just the combination of the history associated with it, the power, again, that 8-year-old mentality, it's like, what's the biggest, baddest, most powerful rocket? Saturn V from, again, 1967 through 2022. So then Artemis 1 launch, that's got more power than the Saturn V. Then the SpaceX Super Heavy Starship has twice the power, sorry, NASA, of Artemis 1. So those are my 3 favorite rockets, but still that historic slow motion launch. And there is a really, really nice slow motion launch video of Artemis 1 too, I have to say. But Saturn V just got a head start of a few decades, so it's going to take a while before I can see that as much. But yeah, power. The bigger, the better, as far as I'm concerned. My pleasure. Any other questions in the room before I ask if there are any online? Okay. Uh, let me see. Will I be able to tell if there are questions online?
I can. Yes, you should be able, people should be able to come on
Just a
and
moment.
raise their hand
If there
and ask their
are,
question.
unfortunately, I don't see any questions here. But, um, in the room in the back with the projector, are you able to see if there are any questions coming in online? Okay. All right. Looks like I'm done. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Ken. I really appreciate your presentation and the state of aerospace, the state of space today and tomorrow. The NASA and commercial space flight, you've given us a lot to think about and walking through all the different contenders, we'll say it that way, in space.
I'm gonna grab my water bottle.